Hello and welcome to a new series that I'll be calling Techumentaries. That is to say, a documentary based around technology. Oh, will I fuck? It's just a documentary. To begin this story, we have to go way back to the 25th of July 1961, when Acorn didn't exist and Clive Sinclair had just formed his first company, Sinclair Radionics, after borrowing £50 and raising finance through article writing at Practical Wireless magazine. Radionics began by developing hi-fi equipment such as the micro amplifier and selling by mail order. All of Sinclair's products would have the ethos of miniaturization at their core, alongside elegance and style. This very ethos would often take the place of reliability and stability, with the company facing large numbers of faulty equipment returns. Nonetheless, Sinclair's innovation would lead the company on, with Chris Curry, who would later go on to form Acorn, joining Radionics in 1966. Curry quickly became integral to Radionics' operation and would help launch their first electronic calculator in 1972 and the Black Watch in 1975. But further technical issues and poor sales led to the National Enterprise Board buying a 43% stake in Radionics in 1976, which would quickly increase. Under the NEB, Sinclair would launch the world's first pocket TV and begin development on the New Brain computer, designed by Mike Wakefield in 1978. The New Brain was intended to be a rival for the recently released Apple II, but it didn't really fit into Sinclair's vision of an inexpensive home micro, and so under the NEB's guidance, was sold off to Newberry Laboratories, who the NEB also had ownership over. Shortly after this, the NEB renamed Sinclair Radionics to Sinclair Electronics Limited, and later Fandar Electronics Limited, which continues in form to this day. Clive was subsequently sent packing, along with a nice golden handshake and various in-development technologies, including the C5 electric car. Handily, Clive had saw most of this coming, and in 1975 had sent Chris Curry off to run another company called Sinclair Instrument Limited, which under his guidance produced a calculator watch, and in 1977 the MK14, a microcomputer kit sold through mail order after the business rebranded to Science of Cambridge Limited. Clive hopped across in 1978, but Curry, frustrated by Clive's unwillingness to further develop the MK14, resigned, and with his friend Herman Hauser, who was just finishing up a doctorate at Cambridge University, founded Cambridge Processor Unit Limited, abbreviated to CPU. You can see what they did there. In reality, they had founded the business whilst Curry was still working for Sinclair, and they actually started out by rather cheekily borrowing a room at Clive's Science of Cambridge premises to provide consultancy. Their first customer was Ace Coin Equipment Limited, who required Fruit Machine controller hardware, and they would carry on serving various other businesses in this way until 1979, when they founded Acorn Computers Limited, with the name intended to depict a growing company, whilst also appearing above Apple in the phone book. And remember, this was the 1970s and shit like this was important back then. Under this brand they would launch the Acorn System 1, based on an automated cow feeder designed by undergraduate recruit Roger Wilson, who is now known as Sophie Wilson. It was in many respects like the MK14, featuring a small keypad and LED display. Acorn would go on to launch the System 2 and 3 in rapid succession, but these were really rack-based Eurocard systems designed mainly for laboratory and industrial use. Whilst this was going on, Clive, on realising the success of Curry's MK14, had dreamt up the idea of the ZX80, a low-cost personal computer that would break the £100 price point and demonstrate to the world that computers were for everybody and not just professionals and businesses. The ZX80 was released in early 1980, and true to its word became the first affordable home micro, featuring 1KB of RAM and a Z80 CPU, which also generated the display output, causing the screen to blank out whilst registering key presses. The machine also had a rather limited Sinclair BASIC, but lacked a floating point, so was arguably not really a true computer. The ZX80 had beaten Acorn in launching a low-cost home micro, but they were hot on their heels, recruiting Steve Ferber, again from Cambridge, to work on hardware. Only a few months later they released the Acorn Atom, based on their System 3 hardware. It boasted a full-stroke keyboard obtained on the cheap, double the memory of the ZX80, and made use of a new NTSC video chip obtained from the States, which was tweaked to allow black and white output on PAL televisions. The Atom was clearly a superior machine, but priced at £120 in kit form and £170 assembled, was respectively £40 and £70 more expensive than Sinclair's machine. This led to the ZX80 selling approximately 100,000 units compared to the Atom's 10,000. But still, this was above Acorn's anticipated numbers, and was therefore a commercial success. With both companies boosted by their initial successes, plans for further machines quickly went into production. This was alongside a rather heated rivalry between the companies. This was in part due to the fractious final working years between Curry and Sinclair, with both parties wanting to show the other they were taking the best path. Sinclair quickly followed up their success with the even cheaper ZX81, released in 1981, priced at £69.95, fully assembled and offering a number of improvements over the 80, including a larger ROM, a slow mode which cut out the display flicker, and even floating point ability. It sold over 1.5 million units, and really was the first machine to become dominant in the home.
If it's got a keyboard, a manual and computer written on it, it'll sell.
It wasn't without its problems though, still retaining the dead-feeling membrane keyboard, and this time shipping with a ROM bug in its square root calculations. Curry and Hauser had been trumped yet again, but they had an ace up their sleeve. Remember the New Brain machine I mentioned earlier? Well, in 1980 the BBC began the initial roots of the BBC Computer Literacy Project, partly encouraged itself by a rivalry where the ITV showed a documentary about the mighty Micro, and the impending revolution it would bring. They therefore wanted a branded machine to feature in their new TV show. Newbury were the first ones to pick up the tab, despite Clive trying to rally objection, even from Curry himself, at the lack of a fair selection process. But in any case, they were unable to develop the New Brain enough to meet production targets. The BBC again put out a tender to other UK computer brands for a fairer competition. Sinclair put out a proposal, as did Tangerine and Dragon Data. But it was Acorn who clinched the deal, reworking their already in development Proton machine at late notice to fit the BBC specifications. And when I say late notice, I mean it. Curry headed down to the BBC's offices in London and confidently told the Beeb board they had an ideal machine, ready and waiting. Desperate for a machine ASAP, the BBC arranged a visit the following week. Of course, the only problem was the machine wasn't ready, waiting, or indeed even remotely built to the required specs. What followed was a famous telephone exchange where Hauser convinced both Ferber and Wilson that each other had agreed to the short time frame.
Roger, Herman. I have a question for you. Can you adapt the new machine for the BBC spec?
We've got a week.
I understand. He says it cannot be done. So, I ask you, Steve, you think it can be done? No? I'm surprised when you tell me this. Oh, because Roger told me that he thought it was possible
To do it in a few days.
And so it began. 5 days to produce a working prototype. The team worked day and night, with the machine only coming to life the very morning the BBC were due to visit. However, the BBC was suitably impressed for Acorn to get the contract almost immediately. In February 1981, and by June, the BBC Micro was conceived and priced up. By December 1981, the Beeb was fully unveiled and was an immediate commercial success, mainly in schools but also in homes that could afford the £299 and £399 price tag for the Model A and B respectively, with parents willing to cash in on both the entertainment and educational value. The A was essentially a cut-down version of the B, with less expansion ports and 16KB compared to 32KB. But to Acorn's surprise, almost all sales were for the Model B. The BBC Micro was a powerful machine hosting the 6502 processor and an array of expandability, including an additional Z80 processor to meet the BBC's requirements of a CP/M compatible machine. Acorn expected sales in the region of 10 to 20,000, but the Beeb would eventually sell a whopping 1.5 million units, allowing Acorn to expand considerably over the next few years. You can imagine Clive's face at this point. Oh, the rage, the bitter, insurmountable rage. Really, the rage was misplaced because by April 1982, Sinclair would launch a machine not only designed to smash the Acorn's home market success, but to completely dominate the home market in glorious rainbow colouring. The Sinclair Spectrum. Now, it's hard to overestimate the impact which this machine made on not only the UK computer market but the global market as well. With another low-cost entry point essentially half that of the Beeb at £179 for the 48K model and £129 for the 16K model, this rubber-keyed beauty would sell over 5 million units, with almost every household with an average occupant age of under 40 owning one. The Commodore 64 wasn't due on the scene for another couple of months, and in any case it was a lot more expensive, so in the majority of cases the Speccy was the personal computer of choice.
But what should be realised is that all those companies together, all of them, throughout Japan, make fewer computers than Sinclair Research on its own.
At the moment, but sure.
Packing another Z80 processor, but this time with a lot more memory than the ZX models, an internal speaker, 15 colours and the keyboard which at least had some tactile feel, it would herald the peak of Sinclair's fame and fortune. At this point, I'd say that Sinclair had a slight edge over Acorn. Both had established markets, one in the educational sector and one in the home gaming market. Both were lucrative enough for each business to succeed if they made the right next steps. Steps which weren't driven by rivalry, ego or narrow-mindedness. But you can guess where this is going, right?
Uh-oh, we're in trouble. Something's come along and it's burst our bubble.
A number of business decisions followed. The first was by Acorn to expand their company, and involved going public and offering shares on the stock exchange. This was ultimately a success, and provided finance for Acorn to expand and continue their operation. However, Acorn would also attempt to break into the American market under Acorn Computer Corporation, but would ultimately fail, spending much of the money raised. Sinclair also sought expansion and, unwilling to relinquish control of his business, like he had suffered under the NEB, tried to expand into foreign markets, including Spain and America. Sinclair's affiliation with Timex in the States was designed to cash in on the people who were currently importing Spectrums to the States in their current UK form. However, the Timex Sinclair machines were mostly incompatible with the existing library of Spectrum soft and hardware, and so failed to make a significant impact. Penetration into Spain was more convincing, but the main bulk of sales would remain in the UK. So, with continued rivalry in mind, Sinclair was also keen to break into more professional marketplaces, and Acorn wanted a slice of that huge, juicy gaming market. So rather than pushing onwards and upwards, some double-stepping and divergence would follow. From Acorn's perspective, its market-increasing solution was to develop a lower-cost, cut-down version of the BBC Micro, marketed at the home and games markets and designed to go head-to-head with the Spectrum. This decision contradicted a number of voices within Acorn, such as Ferber and Wilson, who were looking into improving the Beeb and 32-bit processor design. But after a provisional order from WH Smiths of 120,000 units, Acorn would go ahead with its cut-down plans and produce the Electron for August 1983, utilising ULA circuitry which would pack the Beeb's 102 chips into 12 cut-down versions. Most of the BBC requested specs would also be omitted. The plan was to ship 100,000 of the £175 machines by Christmas, but production problems meant the machines didn't hit the stores until February 1984. Despite the positive hardware reviews, this crucial miss of the Christmas period, coupled with a slowdown in the home computer market, meant that orders were cancelled and Acorn was left with a warehouse of unwanted machines. At around the exact same time, Sinclair would launch the QL machine, a hastily put together design which was intended to break into the professional and business markets, although Clive, or Sir Clive by this point, had created some confusion with the head of Sinclair Computers, Nigel Searle, over whether this machine would be more suited as an upgraded Spectrum for the home or was really intended to break into business use. In any case, even though the hardware was fairly advanced with a Motorola 68010 CPU, the advertising campaign failed, along with poor reviews on the keyboard and compatibility of its new microdrive units. Coupled with this, the machine wasn't compatible with the Spectrum's library of software, meaning it would also fail in the home market like the Timex machines did in the States. The Electron sold adequate numbers to ensure software houses would support it into the early 90s, and the existing back catalogue of stock would be cleared in due course, thanks in part by Dixon's agreeing to ship them out at less than cost price. But in the immediate term, it was nowhere near enough to make up for Acorn's debts. The QL would sell 150,000 units, but was still deemed a commercial failure.
Buyers wanted their home machines to be compatible with the ones at work. Clive's QL wasn't, and it failed to sell.
Unable to make a dent in any markets which were quickly becoming saturated with ever-powerful machines. Further marketing campaigns would lead to the infamous showdown in the Baron of Beef Cambridge pub, where Clive, filled with rage from Acorn's campaign slating Sinclair's reliability, would stride in, advert in hand, and proceed to donk Curry in the face. Both were booted out with their professional lives soon to follow a similar path. Sinclair would go back to the Spectrum line and in 1986 launched the marvellous Spectrum 128K Plus machine, the first Sinclair computer to sport a dedicated sound chip and be backwards compatible with the rest of the Spectrum range. Meanwhile, Acorn would also launch an upgraded micro in the shape of the BBC Master, also featuring 128K of RAM. Both these machines would be successful in their respective markets, but ultimately the financial damage had been done. Sinclair's computer brand was bought out by Alan Sugar in 1986, who swiftly halted the QL's production and relaunched the Spectrum range in a more fitting tribute to his recently released easy-to-use and cheap Amstrad CPC line, which itself would sell 3 million units. Acorn's debts meant it would be bought out by Italian computer company Olivetti in late 1985. The Acorn brand would continue successfully and go on to launch the Archimedes range of machines and the associated RISC-ARM processor, which would form the basis for the most popular range of processors in today's world. While Amstrad Sinclair machines would also sell reasonably well into the 90s. But as for the rivalry, well, from that point it was pretty much done.
Needs to teach you a lesson. That's funny, because everything I learned from you.
The exciting era of the early 80s, heralding a new wave of microcomputers, was over, and consigned to a beautiful part of history, which is worth revisiting at every opportunity you get. Like this one. Both Sinclair and Acorn would leave lasting legacies, with Acorn introducing the RISC chips and introducing computers into the schools in the UK, and Sinclair introducing a whole wealth of children to the home computer market in the early 80s, which heralded a new wave of development and creativity. So there's no real winner here. Well, there is, and it's us. Thank you for watching my documentary on Acorn vs Sinclair. I've got plenty of other videos in my back catalogue and plenty more to come in time. Click one below, contribute to my Patreon if you wish to keep the channel going, or just leave. In any case, thank you very much for watching, and good night.